Okay, so I'm gonna tee up both the main session and then the breakouts that'll come this afternoon. And the first place that I want to start is a word. I feel like it's been used a lot this week, pretty much everywhere I go, and that word is sustain. How many of you in this room have heard that word at least once in the last week? Now keep your hands up. Hold on now. How many of you heard that term at least 5 times? What about 10? Right? I could keep going, right? So, what do we actually mean by sustain? Um, let's do a little quick poll. I want you to take 1 minute, find an elbow partner, and what's your meaning? What's your definition? I say sustain. What is your definition of sustain? 1 minute. Go ahead and get started. Okay, let's get 1 or 2 folks to share their definition. I'm going to need you to use your teacher voice because I can't walk a mic around. Let's get a couple of folks. What did you talk about? How did you define sustain? How did somebody at your table define sustain? No, you didn't. Yes, here. Okay. Ooh, okay. Qualifier. Keep something going strong. Great. One other. Yes. Start a great idea and then find a permanent home. Awesome. That's great. All right. So we're pretty clear about like when we say sustain, like what that looks like, right? We want something that's strong, contributing, giving back. We also want something that maybe grew out of an idea, but also is permanent, right? It stays, right? It's able to provide something that somebody wants, or a community wants, or a team wants, for example. So the thing about it is, you're not going to stop hearing this term. In fact, you're probably going to hear it a lot more in the next like 18 months. And the reason is, about 4 years ago, California had an obscene amount of money as a result of the recovery from the pandemic that it decided to make some really significant investments in. A couple of examples. Education with community schools, around $4.7 billion. In behavioral health, the Children's Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, made up of dozens of programs trying to initiate these innovative programs. CalAIM in the health world, right? This is about, among other things, rewiring our health system for those that qualify for Medicaid or to provide services in a way that's providing value to those individuals. Or in justice systems around CalCourt, right? Dollars that are going to behavioral health departments to provide more preventative upstream services to those that are getting ready to leave the justice system. So the big problem, which I don't think is lost on anybody in this room, is what happens when all this money disappears, which is coming up in the next, I would say 12 to 18 months. Before I do that, I want to share a kind of parable with you. And the parable kind of goes like this. So it's called The Lantern in the Fog. Y'all ready? And the first sentence is like old school, and I'll explain it. So a hamlet sits in fog each winter, not like a hamlet like this. A hamlet is known as like a very small village, right? When settlers were kind of like exploring the Americas or in Europe, right? And so one villager keeps a single lantern burning all night. Another villager decides that they want to do a bonfire only on full moons. When the fog thickens, the lantern's steady glow guides travelers safely home. The bonfire, however, is dark the night that somebody truly, truly needs it. So this is a great parallel to something that we talk with districts and counties and other agencies across California about. It's what I call steady over swing, right? Steady is the small burning lantern that is there every night consistently, right? It has a degree of permanence. versus a bonfire, which roars for like a single night and can be seen from a much larger distance away, but is only there for one night of 30 in the cycle of a full moon. So what's the takeaway here? The takeaway is continual attention, however dim, prevents bigger losses later on, right? That's the lesson. Now, I think that we have to give some credit to the state of California because, sometimes I'm a little harsh on our lovely state of California. And I think it's important to remember that 30 years ago, right, so that's 1995, there was this little program called Healthy Start. Anybody remember this? Healthy Start? A lot of nods in the room. Yeah. And there was a series of reports that was done by RAND, it's a research institution down in LA. There was like 7 or 8 reports, like beautifully written, really well done research. And one of the last reports, which caught my attention, was literally named Financial Sustainability. Like the entire report was gathering evidence from all of these places that had Healthy Start grants, and we're asking them, how are you going to sustain this work over time? And the report basically came to the conclusion of, well, they're going to run out of money, and so somebody needs to write a new check. That was the conclusion of the report, right? So how many times have we heard that since 95, right? Repeatedly. Now, we get a little bit better, right? So in the early 2000s, during the dot-com boom, California once again had all of this money that they could provide to districts. And what they did, instead of saying, well, we're not going to give you any money to continue doing this work, they used those funds to elongate existing initiatives that were occurring in public education, behavioral health, or in justice, right? So we get a little bit better, okay? Now we fast forward to 2020 and the pandemic, this massive set of investments that I was mentioning earlier. And the state learns again. They say, instead of only giving these systems a year, which is what they gave back in the early 2000s, we're going to give them 5 years, in some cases 7 years, to do this work. But here's the difficult part of the conversation. We're still in this moment where everyone's wondering, what happens after this money goes away? We have not figured out as a field how to navigate the constant swing that California provides to us of upwards investments and then a pullback on those investments. So one of the things that I would just want to kind of lay out for your thinking during the main panel and during the panels today is this frame of 4 types of ways to sustain this work over time. And we contended in the integrated care field guide that there were basically 4 pathways to do this, okay? The first one we already really know, which is get the state or somebody else to write a big check that says, here you go, have fun, go at it, right? That's everybody's dream. That's what we constantly pursue. And that is important, particularly when we're thinking about magnanimous investments that we're making in things that we know work. But for those things that are still building evidence, they still need the ability to say, hey, the research supports that this actually works. Perhaps there's other pathways, right? So that brings us to number 2, which is really building on this idea, but says to agencies that are funding that work, how is it that you can consider this intervention or this program or this approach that might be integrated or replace something that is not doing the thing that we intend to do for the communities that we serve, students, families, adults. Now, this is one of the hardest ones to do, right? Because if you're sitting around in your agency or you're sitting around in a nonprofit, who wants to be the person to raise their hand and say, okay, I'll sacrifice $1 million to let that other program come in? Raise a hand. Who did that? Who did that? Anybody? Exactly, right? So this is the point. We're stuck. We are stuck in this cycle, this belief that if I can just continue to fund the things that I oversee, and I can follow through on that, and everybody else can do that in their silos, in their work, that we're going to get to the product, the result that we desire. But the evidence would say over the last 30 years, especially when we think about the sustained permanency of some of these investments, that hasn't really been the case. Now, the story that I'm going to tell around this, I recently was talking to a former superintendent of a large Central Valley district, and he was kind of in his second year in this system, and he was getting really frustrated because he would go around to talk to school principals, and he would ask the principals what they were doing with their funding, Title I, general purpose, other grants, and some of them had real clarity on some parts of those resources, right? But then he would ask a question. He's like, oh, I see that you have a contract with X to do Y for students. And he reported that the majority of the time, 7 times out of 10, the principal wasn't aware of what was going on. Now, I could buy that for like a high school principal, right? An individual that was overseeing, say, 2,000 or 3,000 students and the staff. But these were also elementary principals. These were middle school principals. So he went through the process of corralling all the contracts in that system and bringing them together in one place and asking the principals before they went into the subsequent fiscal year, do you really need this? Are you really able to optimize what you're doing with those funds to serve students? And suddenly, the system had additional money because principals started saying, we're not going to focus on these things right now. We're going to make these investments here that allow us to advance and accelerate, and then maybe we'll come back to these dollars here. So suddenly there was a conversation in the system that for a long time had said, we don't have funds. We need more money to do this work. And through this internal process, he was able to lead individuals, other leaders in the system, to a place that said, we can now make some trade-offs. The trade-off being we're not going to do these things, or we're going to slow these things down, and instead we're going to fund these things over here. So that's pathway 2. The third pathway is to think about reconciling roles and responsibilities in your systems. In our education and social services, we fund the vast majority of our money, our monetary resources go to people. And the likelihood, if not the certainty, that there is overlap between those roles and responsibilities, not only within, but also across agencies, is not in denial. It's not in doubt. We know that it happens, right? And it takes time to build those systems to say and ask those questions. How is it that we can share those responsibilities while also serving those same types of clients? Now, the fourth one, go on a little bit of a ride with me for a moment. And we talk about this one a lot. We say it a lot. But I'm not convinced that we truly know what it means. So by a show of hands, how many people have heard the word capacity in the last week? Like everybody in the room. And everybody that's not paying attention to me probably have heard it too. There we go. So here's the super interesting thing about capacity is that it infers this idea that you are investing in somebody's ability to do something more effectively, efficiently, to be bigger, to deliver more value than what they were able to do before you made that monetary investment. Professional development, a training, a conference such as this, right? Yet, we have very little way to measure how capacity changes for adults over time. Very little. And in the cases where we've tried to do this, notably Race to the Top during in public education, where we tried to measure teachers on test scores, was an ultimate failure. And so part of, and I'm not saying we go there because that clearly did not work, but you have an opportunity to think about how capacity changes in the course of these investments, right? So many of you in this room have heard about or participate in the Transforming Together work, right? Breaking Barriers, San Bernardino County, et cetera, et cetera. For several years now, you all have been receiving a lot of support, right? Your way of thinking about systems is different today than it was 2 years ago. Has anybody captured how that makes a difference? Has anybody captured that through that process, you, as a leader in a county office of ed or in a public health department, are suddenly making different choices about the resources that you oversee? And this is what I would submit is a fourth pathway. It is our ability to see how the monetary resources play out through the human beings and adults that are doing the work day after day after day, that are shifting and moving resources that is hidden beneath financial reports and the next wave of programs that we're trying to introduce in California. So I'm going to invite you through this panel, and I'm going to bring up these wonderful crew in just a minute, and the sessions this afternoon to think about that question of how these panels are investing in adults, that are investing in people, and how those people can make different decisions. Their capacity to understand strategy, to understand sustainability, the permanency of programs that are working is changing as a result of this work. And I'm not going to say that it isn't important to fund the material things that need to continue on with these programs, and advocacy is certainly needed for that at the state level. But I am inviting you to think about resources in a different way, to absorb how these leaders in our system today are thinking about that work forward.